She said it over dessert. I wish you were never born. Everyone laughed, except me. I put my fork down slowly. My heart was racing, but I smiled. Then I said my one line. The room went dead silent. She never spoke to me again. I walked out. I need to tell you about the night that changed everything. The night I finally stood up to my mother-in-law, Patricia Morrison, after 7 years of swallowing her poison with a smile. It was supposed to be a celebration. My husband Derek's promotion to senior partner at his law firm. His entire family had gathered at the Belmont, this upscale restaurant in downtown Boston where the cheapest entree costs more than my weekly grocery budget. Patricia had insisted on hosting, which should have been my first warning sign. I'm Emma, by the way. Emma Collins, though I'd been Emma Morrison for 7 years. 32 years old, elementary school teacher, and apparently not good enough for the Morrison family legacy. Never have been, never will be, according to Patricia. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The dinner started off well enough. Derek's father, Richard, was in good spirits, telling stories about Derek's childhood. His sister, Vanessa, was being surprisingly civil to me, probably because her new boyfriend, some finance guy named Brett, was there and she wanted to look like she came from a functional family. I knew this was boyfriend number 3 this year. The previous one, Chad, had lasted just long enough for Patricia to brag about sending them to the family villa in Tuscany. 3 weeks after they returned, Chad had dumped Vanessa. But we didn't talk about that. Derek's younger brother, Marcus, was his usual quiet self, more interested in his phone than the conversation. Patricia sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court, her perfectly highlighted blonde hair not moving an inch despite the restaurant's air conditioning. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and that smile, that practiced, condescending smile that never quite reached her cold blue eyes. So, Derek, Patricia said, dabbing the corner of her mouth with her napkin. Now that you've made partner, perhaps it's time to think about upgrading some things in your life. Derek smiled, oblivious as always to his mother's double meanings. The firm's already talking about moving me to a bigger office. I wasn't talking about your office, darling, Patricia said smoothly. I meant your living situation. That little apartment in Cambridge is hardly befitting a senior partner. You need a proper home in a proper neighborhood. We like our apartment, I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken in nearly 20 minutes. Patricia's gaze slid to me like a snake spotting prey. Oh, Emma? Still clinging to that cramped little place? I suppose it's understandable. It's probably the nicest place you've ever lived. Vanessa snorted into her wine glass. Marcus didn't even look up from his phone. Mom, Derek said with a nervous laugh, come on. What? Patricia's eyes widened in mock innocence. I'm simply being realistic. Emma comes from such a different background. There's no shame in that. Although, I do wonder sometimes if the gap isn't too wide to bridge. My jaw tightened, but I kept my mouth shut. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably but said nothing. He never did. That was the Morrison way, maintain appearances at all costs, even if it meant watching your son's wife get verbally eviscerated over dinner rolls. I thought back to the early days, when I'd first met Derek at that conference in Chicago. He'd been different then, or maybe I'd just been blind to the warning signs. He was charming, successful, intelligent. He'd swept me off my feet with romantic dinners and surprise weekend trips. When he proposed after 2 years of dating, I'd said yes without hesitation. Meeting Patricia had been my first real test. She'd looked me up and down like I was livestock at an auction, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. So you're a teacher, she'd said, the word dripping with disdain. How? Quaint. Derek had laughed nervously and changed the subject, and I'd convinced myself it would get better. It never did. The waiter arrived then, a blessing in disguise, presenting our desserts with a flourish. Mine was some elaborate chocolate thing that looked like it belonged in an art museum. I wasn't even hungry anymore. My stomach was twisted in knots, the way it always was after spending any amount of time with Patricia. So, Derek, Patricia continued, as if she hadn't just insulted me, your father and I were discussing your future. Now that you've reached this milestone, we think it's time to seriously consider your trajectory. The connections you make now will define the rest of your career. I'm listening, Derek said, digging into his tiramisu. The Hartwell Benefit Gala next month. It's absolutely crucial that you make the right impression. You'll need to network with the right people, present yourself properly. She paused, taking a delicate bite of her crème brûlée. Of course, having the right partner by your side is essential for these events. I felt it coming like a storm rolling in, but I couldn't stop it. Emma, dear, Patricia turned to me, her voice dripping with false sweetness, perhaps you could use some guidance on appropriate attire for these high-profile events? I'd hate for you to embarrass Derek with one of your, shall we say, creative fashion choices? Remember that unfortunate incident at the charity auction last year? Vanessa giggled. The dress with the sparkles. Oh my God, Mom, I almost forgot about that. It was a perfectly nice dress, I said, my voice tight. For a high school prom, perhaps, Patricia said. But for Boston's elite? Emma, you have to understand, these events require a certain level of sophistication. A certain reading, if you will. Derek shifted uncomfortably. Mom, that's a bit harsh. Harsh? I'm trying to help. Someone needs to tell her the truth, Patricia sighed dramatically. You know, Derek, I've been thinking. Marriage is about compatibility, about coming from similar worlds. You and Emma, well, you're from such different places. Different values, different upbringings. Here we go, Marcus muttered, finally looking up from his phone. Patricia ignored him. I remember when you brought Emma home that first time. She was sweet, I'll give her that. But sweetness doesn't prepare you for the realities of our world. I told your father then, I said, Richard, this won't work. She doesn't understand our way of life. But did anyone listen to me? No. My hands were shaking under the table. 7 years of this. 7 years of being told I wasn't good enough, wasn't classy enough, wasn't rich enough. 7 years of Derek making excuses for her, telling me she didn't mean it, that she'd warm up eventually. Patricia, Richard said weakly, maybe we should change the subject. Why? Because the truth is uncomfortable? Patricia took another bite of her dessert, chewing thoughtfully. Emma's a nice girl from a nice working-class family. There's nothing wrong with that. But let's be honest, she's not what we envisioned for Derek. She's not what Derek needs for the life he's building. Mom, seriously, Derek said, but there was no real force behind it. There never was. I'm simply being realistic, Derek. Look at her. Look at where she comes from. Her father was a mechanic, for heaven's sake. Her mother worked in a diner. No college education in that family until Emma struggled through on student loans. Patricia's voice was clinical, like she was dissecting a specimen. How can someone from that background possibly navigate the world you're entering? My father had been a good man. He'd worked 60-hour weeks at Miller's auto shop to make sure my younger sister Sarah and I had everything we needed. He taught me the value of hard work, of integrity, of treating everyone with respect regardless of their bank account. He died of a heart attack 3 years ago, and Patricia hadn't even bothered to come to the funeral. She'd sent flowers with a generic card. Sarah had flown in from Denver where she was working as a nurse, and we'd held each other through the service while Derek stood awkwardly to the side, probably relieved his mother had an excuse not to attend. My mother still worked at Rosie's Diner, still served coffee and pancakes to factory workers and truck drivers with a smile on her face. She'd been doing it for 30 years, putting 2 daughters through college on tips and minimum wage. She was the strongest person I knew. And Patricia had never even learned her first name. In 7 years, she'd never once asked my mother about her life, her interests, her dreams. To Patricia, my mother was just the diner woman, invisible and irrelevant. I thought about calling my mother right then, just to hear her voice, to remind myself where I came from and why that was nothing to be ashamed of. But I couldn't move. I was frozen in my seat, paralyzed by the weight of 7 years of accumulated insults. Vanessa was watching me now, a cruel smile playing on her lips. She'd always taken her cues from her mother. I remembered a conversation we'd had once, just the two of us, before she'd fully embraced Patricia's cruelty. We'd been at a family brunch, and she'd pulled me aside. You know, she'd said quietly, I used to think Mom was wrong about you. I thought you were good for Derek. But watching you try so hard to fit in, it's kind of sad. You're never going to be one of us, Emma. You must know that by now. I'd been stunned. Vanessa had seemed almost sympathetic in earlier visits, like she understood what it was like to live under Patricia's judgment. But I'd been wrong. She wasn't sympathetic. She was just waiting to see if I'd survive long enough to become a permanent target, or if I'd break and leave, making room for Patricia to find Derek a more suitable wife. You know what I think? Patricia continued, warming to her subject. I think Emma knows she's out of her depth. That's why she clings so desperately to that teaching job of hers. It's her safety net for when this marriage inevitably falls apart. She's just waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's not true, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. But even as I said it, I wondered if there was a kernel of truth to her words. Not about the marriage failing, but about the constant state of alertness I lived in, waiting for the next attack, the next humiliation. My teaching job had become my refuge. At school, I was respected. My colleagues valued my opinions. My students loved me. Parents thanked me for making a difference in their children's lives. In my classroom, I was enough. More than enough. I was good at what I did, and people recognized that. But the moment I stepped into the Morrison family orbit, all of that evaporated. I became small again, insignificant, desperately trying to prove my worth to people who decided before they even met me that I had none. I thought about the Morrison family photo wall in their house, the one in the grand hallway that visitors saw immediately upon entering. 3 generations of Morrisons stared down from those frames, distinguished lawyers, successful businessmen, society wives. And then there were the recent additions: Vanessa's engagement photo, Marcus's graduation portrait, Derek's partnership announcement. But our wedding photo? That had been relegated to a small frame in the guest bathroom. The message was clear. Isn't it? Be honest with yourself, Emma. You wake up every day wondering when Derek will realize he made a mistake. When he'll see that he settled for you when he could have had so much better. Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying me. I've seen the way you look at him sometimes, that desperate little look of insecurity. It's rather pathetic, actually. My vision was blurring. I focused on my dessert, on the perfect chocolate swirls, trying to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way my therapist had taught me. Yes, I'd been seeing a therapist for 2 years, trying to manage the anxiety that came with being part of this family. Another thing Patricia didn't know about, another sign of my weakness she would have pounced on if she'd found out. The chocolate dessert in front of me probably cost $40. $40 for something I couldn't even taste anymore, couldn't even swallow past the lump in my throat. I thought about my students, about the kids in my class who came to school hungry because their parents were working 3 jobs to make ends meet. I thought about how many school supplies $40 could buy, how many books, how many art supplies. But this was the Morrison world. A world where $40 desserts were nothing, where the price tag on Patricia's dress could feed a family for a month, where money was just a tool to establish hierarchy and maintain power. And I was at the bottom of that hierarchy, forever the outsider, forever inferior. I remembered last month, when Derek and I had been trying to budget for a vacation. We'd been looking at a modest trip to Maine, maybe a long weekend at a bed and breakfast. Patricia had overheard us discussing it and had laughed. A bed and breakfast? How provincial. When Vanessa and Chad wanted to get away, we sent them to our villa in Tuscany for 2 weeks. The implication being, of course, that we couldn't afford better, that we were playing at being adults while the real Morrisons lived the life we could only dream of. Chad, by the way, had dumped Vanessa 3 weeks later. But nobody mentioned that. Nobody mentioned that Vanessa was on a streak of failed relationships that would have been sad if she weren't so cruel herself. Nobody mentioned that Marcus was clearly unhappy, glued to his phone to avoid engaging with his toxic family. Nobody mentioned that Richard had the hollow look of a man who'd given up on life decades ago. No, in the Morrison family, we only talked about successes, about appearances, about maintaining the illusion of perfection while the rot underneath went ignored. Nobody mentioned that just last month, Patricia had organized a charity gala where the money raised barely covered the cost of the event itself, but she'd gotten her photo in the society pages. Nobody mentioned that Richard's law firm had quietly pushed him toward early retirement because his billable hours had dropped to almost nothing. You know what the worst part is? Patricia said, and I just knew, that whatever came next was going to be the kill shot. If I'm being completely honest, and I pride myself on honesty, I sometimes wish Derek had never met you. In fact, when I really think about it. She paused, making sure she had everyone's attention. I wish you were never born. The table went silent for a heartbeat. Then Vanessa laughed. It started as a snicker, then grew into a full laugh. Marcus cracked a smile, shaking his head. Richard looked uncomfortable but said nothing, the coward. Derek's eyes were wide, and he opened his mouth to speak, but Vanessa was already chiming in. Oh my God, Mom, Vanessa gasped between laughs. That's so savage. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, Patricia said with a little shrug, a smug smile on her face as she took another bite of her dessert. Something inside me snapped. Not in a loud, dramatic way. It was quiet, like a rubber band stretched too far finally breaking. 7 years of accumulated hurt, humiliation, and anger crystallized in that moment into perfect, clear rage. I put my fork down slowly and carefully on the edge of my plate. It made a soft clink against the china. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but strangely, I felt completely calm. Detached, even. Like I was watching myself from outside my body. I looked at Patricia. Really looked at her. And I smiled. You know what's funny? I said quietly. The table fell silent. I spent 7 years trying to earn your approval. 7 years trying to be good enough for you. 7 years believing that maybe, somehow, I could win you over. Patricia's smile faltered slightly. But I finally understand something, I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The problem was never me. It was you. You're a miserable, cruel woman who tears people down because your own life is empty and meaningless despite all your money and status. Excuse me? Patricia's face was turning red. I'm not finished. My voice was calm, almost conversational. You want to know why your husband barely speaks to you unless he has to? Why Marcus can't wait to leave every family gathering. Why Vanessa is on her third boyfriend this year, desperately seeking approval from men because she never got it from you. It's because you're toxic. You're a cancer in your own family. How dare you, Patricia hissed. I'm the lucky one here, I said, standing up slowly. Because after tonight, I never have to see you again. But you? You're stuck being you for the rest of your life. And that, I looked her dead in the eye, is a fate worse than anything you could ever say to me. I picked up my purse, my hand surprisingly steady. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath. I could feel eyes on us from other tables. Part of me registered that this would be gossip for weeks, that the Morrison name would be whispered about in country clubs and charity galas. And I didn't care. For the first time in 7 years, I genuinely didn't care what these people thought. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of Richard's face. For just a moment, I saw something there I'd never seen before: respect. Maybe even envy. Here was a man who'd spent his entire marriage swallowing his words, keeping the peace, letting his wife run roughshod over everyone including him. And here I was, doing what he'd never had the courage to do, walking away. Emma, Derek finally found his voice, standing up. Wait, let's just... No, Derek. I turned to him, and I felt sorry for him then. Sorry that he was so conditioned by this woman that he couldn't see what she'd become. You're going to have to make a choice. But I already know what you'll choose. You always do. I looked at Patricia one last time. She was staring at me with her mouth slightly open, her perfect composure finally cracked. Have a nice life, Patricia. I sincerely hope it brings you everything you deserve. Then I turned and walked out of that restaurant with my head high, my back straight, and my dignity intact for the first time in 7 years. The cool Boston night air hit my face as I stepped outside, and I realized I was shaking. Not from fear or sadness, but from the sheer relief of finally standing up for myself. I pulled out my phone and ordered an Uber, not even sure where I wanted to go. Just away. Away from that restaurant, that family, that life. My phone started ringing almost immediately. Derek. I declined the call. It rang again. Declined again. Then the texts started flooding in. Emma, please, come back. We can talk about this. My mother was out of line, I'll talk to her. Where are you? Let me come get you. Emma, answer me. I turned my phone on silent and waited for my Uber. The days that followed were a blur. I stayed at my friend Jessica's apartment, a cozy one-bedroom in Somerville that felt like a sanctuary. Derek called and texted constantly. I ignored him for 3 days, needing the space to think, to feel, to process what had happened. On the 4th day, I finally agreed to meet him. We sat in a coffee shop in Harvard Square, the same place where he'd first asked me out 9 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was where it had all begun, and now it was where it would end. The same corner table, the same view of the street, but everything else had changed. We had changed. Or maybe I was the only one who had changed, and that was the whole problem. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, rumpled suit, hair that hadn't been combed properly. Good. Emma, he started, reaching for my hand. I pulled it back. I'm so sorry. My mother was completely out of line. I've had a long talk with her, and she understands that what she said was unacceptable. Does she understand, Derek? Really? Or did she give you some non-apology about not meaning it that way or just being honest? He was quiet, which was answer enough. That's what I thought. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, needing something to hold on to. Derek, this isn't about one dinner. This is about 7 years of your mother treating me like dirt while you stood by and let it happen. I didn't let it happen. I talked to her. Multiple times. Talking isn't enough. I realized I'd raised my voice. Other patrons were looking at us. I lowered it again. Talking isn't enough when she keeps doing it. You needed to draw a line. You needed to tell her that if she couldn't respect me, there would be consequences. But you never did. Because at the end of the day, you were more afraid of standing up to your mother than you were of losing me. That's not fair. Isn't it? Be honest with yourself, Derek. How many times did you make excuses for her? How many times did you tell me she didn't mean it, or that I was being too sensitive, or that she'd come around eventually? How many times did you choose keeping the peace over defending your wife? He was crying now, silent tears running down his face. I love you, Emma. I do. I know I screwed up. I know I should have done more. But please, don't give up on us. We can work through this. Can we? Because here's the thing, Derek. Even if your mother apologized, even if she got down on her knees and begged for forgiveness, the damage is done. I've spent 7 years watching you prioritize her feelings over mine. 7 years feeling like I had to earn my place in your life. And I'm exhausted. So that's it? You're just giving up? I looked at him, This man I'd loved, this man I'd built a life with, and I felt sad. Sad for what we'd had, sad for what we'd lost, sad for what we could never be. I'm not giving up, Derek. I'm choosing myself. For the first time in 7 years, I'm putting myself first. We sat in silence for a long moment. The coffee shop buzzed with life around us, people ordering lattes and pastries, having normal conversations, living normal lives. What happens now? Derek asked finally. Now, I'm going to stay with Jessica for a while. Then I'm going to find my own place. And we're going to figure out the divorce details. Divorce, he said the word like it was foreign, incomprehensible. Did you think I'd come back? After everything? I hoped. He wiped his eyes. I hoped we could fix this. Some things can't be fixed, Derek. Some things are too broken. I stood up, gathering my purse. He looked up at me with such desperation that I almost wavered. Almost. Goodbye, Derek. Emma, wait. He stood up too, but made no move to stop me. For what it's worth, I am sorry. I really am. And you were right. About all of it. About my mother, about me, about everything. I know, I said softly. But sorry doesn't undo 7 years. Sorry doesn't give me back the person I was before I started shrinking myself to fit into your family's world. And then I walked out of that coffee shop, out of that relationship, and toward whatever came next. The divorce was surprisingly amicable. Derek didn't fight me on anything. He gave me more than my fair share, actually, like he was trying to pay penance for his years of weakness. I didn't want his money, didn't want anything that tied me to that family, but Jessica convinced me to be practical. Take it, she said. You earned it, dealing with that which for 7 years. I did take it. Not out of spite, but out of practicality. I used it to pay off my student loans, those loans Patricia had thrown in my face so many times. The ones that proved I wasn't born with a silver spoon, that I'd had to work for everything I had. Paying off that debt felt like cutting one more tie to my old life, one more weight lifted off my shoulders. The story of that dinner spread through Derek's family like wildfire. Apparently, after I left, Marcus had started slow clapping, which turned into a full argument between him and Patricia. Vanessa had called him disrespectful. Richard had just sat there, as usual, saying nothing. Derek had finally, told his mother exactly what he thought of her behavior. Too little, too late, but still. What I didn't know until later was that Derek had actually recorded part of the dinner on his phone. Not intentionally, apparently he'd started a voice memo earlier to capture some business idea and forgotten to turn it off. So he had audio of everything Patricia had said, everything I'd said in response. He told me later that he'd listened to it over and over, finally hearing what he'd been deaf to for so many years. The recording revealed something else too. In the silence after I'd left, before Marcus started clapping, you could hear Patricia's voice, small and uncertain in a way I'd never heard it before. She didn't mean that, Patricia had said. She's just being dramatic. She'll apologize tomorrow. But Vanessa's response was what shocked me most when Derek told me about it. Mom, she'd said, and her voice was shaking, I think she meant every word. And I think she was right. Apparently, that had been the moment Patricia realized she'd gone too far. Not because she felt remorse, I doubt Patricia Morrison is capable of genuine remorse, but because she saw her carefully constructed image crumbling. The other diners had heard everything. The restaurant staff had heard everything. Word was already spreading. I heard through mutual friends that Patricia had been humiliated. Not because of what I'd said, but because the entire restaurant had witnessed it. Turned out several people there knew the Morrisons, and word got around in their precious social circle. Patricia Morrison, the woman who prided herself on propriety and class, had been called out publicly by her daughter-in-law. The scandal of it. One friend told me that Patricia had tried to spin it, telling people I'd had some kind of breakdown, that I was unstable, that the pressure of being married to Derek had been too much for someone of my background. But the problem was, too many people had been there. Too many people had heard her viciousness, had seen her cruelty, had witnessed the moment she told me she wished I was never born. The Morrison family's reputation took a hit. Not a major one, they had too much money and influence for that, but enough. Enough that Patricia had to step down from her position on the board of her precious charity organization. Enough that some of her society friends started keeping their distance. Enough that for the first time in her life, Patricia Morrison faced consequences for her actions. I won't lie and say I didn't feel a savage satisfaction hearing that. I'd spent 7 years being her punching bag, 7 years being told I wasn't good enough, and now everyone knew exactly what kind of person she was. The emperor had no clothes, and everyone could finally see it. Marcus called me a week after the divorce was finalized. I was surprised, we'd never been particularly close. During family gatherings, he'd always been the quiet one, the one who disappeared into his phone or made excuses to leave early. I'd assumed he was just antisocial or didn't care about family drama. Emma? It's Marcus. Hey, Marcus. Everything okay? Yeah, He paused. I wanted to tell you something. What you did at that dinner, what you said to my mother, it was the bravest thing I've ever seen. I didn't know what to say to that. She's been unbearable my whole life, he continued. To me, to Vanessa, to everyone. But nobody ever stood up to her like you did. And I just wanted you to know that I respect the hell out of you for it. Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot. There was a pause, and I could hear him breathing, like he was gathering courage for what came next. You know, when I was 13, I wanted to quit lacrosse and join the school theater program. I loved acting, loved being on stage. But Mom said theater was for, he laughed bitterly, and I quote, artistic types and people with no real ambition. She said if I quit lacrosse, I'd be throwing away my future. So I stayed on the team. Hated every minute of it. Ended up tearing my ACL junior year and never played again anyway. Marcus, I'm so sorry. When I was 16, I had this girlfriend, Sarah. She was smart, funny, kind. But her dad was a plumber. Mom made it clear she wasn't Morrison material. I broke up with Sarah because I didn't want to put her through what you went through. I was a coward. I've been a coward my whole life. My heart ached for him. I'd been so focused on my own pain, I hadn't seen that Marcus was suffering too. That he'd been another victim of Patricia's toxicity, just one who'd learned to cope by retreating, by making himself small and invisible. But watching you, he continued, watching you finally say what we've all been thinking for years. Emma, you freed me. You showed me that I don't have to take it anymore. That I can choose myself over her approval. Also, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, I'm moving to Seattle. Getting as far away from her as I can. Thought you should know, since you kind of inspired it. I'm going to look into community theater there. Maybe it's too late to be an actor professionally, but I can at least do it for fun, you know? Do something that makes me happy instead of something that makes her proud. That's wonderful, Marcus. Really. I'm proud of you. One more thing, he said. Vanessa's been different since that night too. She won't admit it, but I think your words hit her hard. She's been seeing a therapist. First time ever. Mom doesn't know. Vanessa made me promise not to tell. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, thinking about the ripples my one moment of standing up for myself had created. Marcus finding his courage. Derek finally seeing his mother clearly. Even Vanessa, according to Jessica's intel, had started seeing a therapist. As for Patricia, I heard she tried to reach out to Derek multiple times, trying to mend fences, trying to get things back to the way they were. But Derek had established boundaries. Real ones. He still saw his parents, but not at their beck and call. Not on their terms. Would he have done that if I'd stayed? I don't think so. Sometimes people need to lose everything before they understand what they had. It's been 6 months since that night. I'm living in a small but bright apartment in Brighton, just me and a cat I adopted named Pepper. I still teach, and I'm actually working on my master's degree in education. The one Patricia had mocked me for considering, saying it was a waste since teaching wasn't a real career. The funny thing about that master's degree is that I'd been accepted into the program 3 years ago. But Patricia's constant criticisms had gotten into my head, made me doubt myself. More school loans? She'd said when I'd mentioned it to Derek. For what? So you can teach the same little children for slightly more money? How? Ambitious. I'd withdrawn my acceptance, convinced she was right, that I was being foolish and impractical. But now, I'm back in school. My classes are in the evenings, and I love them. I'm studying educational psychology, learning about childhood development, discovering new teaching methodologies. My professors are impressed with my work. One of them even asked me to co-author a paper with her on trauma-informed teaching practices. Me, Emma Collins again, back to my maiden name after the divorce, co-authoring an academic paper. Patricia would die. Actually, I found out through Derek that Patricia did find out about my master's degree. According to him, she'd been at some charity luncheon when one of her friends mentioned seeing my name on a Dean's List announcement from Boston University. Patricia had apparently gone pale, made some excuse, and left early. The idea that I was succeeding, thriving even, without the Morrison name must have been unbearable for her. My apartment in Brighton is everything the place I shared with Derek wasn't. It's small, sure, but it's mine. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, colorful throw pillows that Patricia would have called garish, artwork from local artists that she would have deemed unsophisticated, bookshelves crammed with paperbacks instead of leather-bound first editions bought for show. My kitchen has mismatched mugs that I love, not the complete set of fine china Patricia had insisted we register for. And Pepper, my cat, is a long-haired orange tabby I found at a shelter. Patricia claimed to be allergic to cats, though I suspected it was more about control than allergies, which was why Derek and I had never had pets. She'd made it clear that pets were messy and uncivilized unless they're purebred show dogs. So Pepper, with her scraggly shelter origins and tendency to knock things off counters, would have been Patricia's nightmare. Which makes me love her even more. I've been on a few dates. Nothing serious, but that's okay. I'm relearning who I am without Derek, without the constant pressure to be someone I'm not. It's strange and scary and absolutely liberating. I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be myself, to not constantly monitor my words and actions for things that might bring criticism or mockery. My first date after the divorce was a disaster, actually. Nice guy, a teacher from another school in the district. But halfway through dinner, he made a comment about my wine choice. "That's an interesting selection," he'd said, and I'd immediately tensed up, waiting for the judgment, the subtle put-down. But he just smiled and said, "I've never tried that one." "How is it?" I'd almost cried right there in the restaurant. It was such a simple thing, but it reminded me that not everyone was looking for ways to tear me down, that sometimes the comment was just a comment, not an attack. I've been learning to trust again. To trust that people mean what they say, that not every interaction is a minefield, that I don't have to be on guard every second. It's harder than it sounds. 7 years of conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. Jessica dragged me to a gallery opening last week. Some new artist she was excited about. I was standing in front of a painting, a chaotic mix of dark colors that somehow came together into something beautiful, when someone spoke beside me. Powerful, isn't it? I turned. Tall, dark hair, kind eyes, expensive but understated suit. Definitely not my usual type, which was probably a good thing. It is, I agreed. It's like chaos resolving into order. "I'm Nathan," he said, extending his hand. "Emma." We talked for 2 hours. About art, about life, about everything and nothing. He was a professor at Boston University, taught philosophy. He made me laugh. He listened when I talked. He didn't try to impress me or show off. When he asked for my number, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to give it to him, but because I was scared. Scared of jumping into something new, scared of making the same mistakes. But then I remembered that moment in the restaurant. The feeling of finally standing up for myself. The power of choosing my own worth over someone else's approval. "I'd like that," I said, and gave him my number. I don't know if anything will come of it with Nathan. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But that's not the point. The point is that I'm open to it. Open to possibilities, open to people who see me and value me, open to a life where I don't have to shrink myself to fit into someone else's world. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how I handled that dinner. If I wish I'd been calmer, more composed, taken the high road. I tell them no. I don't regret it for a second. Because that moment, that one moment of complete honesty, of refusing to swallow one more ounce of poison with a smile, that moment saved me. It gave me back to myself. Patricia Morrison wanted me to disappear, to erase myself, to wish I was never born. Instead, I was reborn. Into someone stronger, someone who knows her worth, someone who will never again let another person make her feel less than. Last week, I ran into Derek at a bookstore. We were both awkward at first, but then we found our footing. We talked briefly, just catching up. He looked better, healthier. He told me he'd been in therapy, working through his issues with his mother, learning to set boundaries. "I'm proud of you," I told him, and I meant it. "I'm proud of you too," he said. "You look happy, Emma." "Really happy." I am, I realized. I really am. We parted ways amicably, and I felt a sense of closure I hadn't known I needed. There was no anger left, no resentment. Just a quiet acknowledgement that we'd both grown, albeit separately. As I walked out of that bookstore into the bright Boston afternoon, I thought about Patricia's words. "I wish you were never born." The words that had cut so deep, that had been meant to destroy me. Instead, they'd freed me. Because in standing up to her, in refusing to accept her judgment of my worth, I'd been born again. Not into the person she wanted me to be, not into the person Derek needed me to be, but into the person I was always meant to be. And that person? She's pretty incredible. Sometimes the worst things people say to us become the catalyst for our greatest transformations. Sometimes cruelty, when met with courage, becomes the birthplace of our truest selves. I put my fork down slowly that night, my heart racing, but I smiled. And in that smile, in that moment, I found myself. And I've never looked back.